Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Ad America TV. Hi, I'm Maya Trainer. I'm one of the guides here at Ad America, and we welcome our audience joining us online. We truly hope that you are doing well and staying safe amidst this outbreak. Well, anyway, for those of you who are first-timers here, hi, welcome to Ad America TV for the first time. Ad America is the U.S. Embassy's American Center. Our mission is to provide a space for young generations of Indonesia to learn more about the United States. We have temporarily moved to a solely digital platform, so you can enjoy our program from the comfort of your own home and help flatten the curve of COVID-19. Don't forget to leave your questions in the comment box below, and our panelists will answer them later in the seminar. And for our friends here who are joining us through Zoom, there are a couple of features that you can use to actively participate in the seminar. You can use the raise hand section to ask your questions with your video on, or you can also use the chat box section whenever you wanted to say hi to the other participant and also the panelist as well. But please keep in mind to use these features wisely, all right? Cool. Now today we will be having a session titled Women in Politics, Megawati Soekarnoputri, Kamala Harris, and you. But in the meantime, I will break the ice a little bit with our social media quiz. And our question of the day is it true or false that Megawati Soekarnoputri is the fourth president of Republic of Indonesia? I will repeat the question one more time. Listen carefully. Is it true or false that Megawati Soekarnoputri is the fourth president of the Republic of Indonesia? You can participate this quiz through our social media comment section and stay tuned till the end of this event to find out if you got the answers right. And now before we begin, here's an opening remarks from Ibu Linda Hines, Security Unit Chief, Political Section, U.S. Embassy, Jakarta.
Thank you so much, Ibu Maya. Selamat malam semuanya. Nama saya Linda Hines dan saya Wakil Konselor Urusan Politik Militer di Kedutaan Deklarasi Jakarta. Saya menjadi diplomat tahun 2006 dan saya senang melihat pertumbuhan perempuan dalam politik sejak itu. Of course, the big news story in the United States that we're all still talking about is that we have our first female vice president ever. We've had few and far between female candidates for either the presidency or the vice presidency since the US was founded in 1776. So it was a big sigh of relief for me and many others when we finally heard that cracking glass in the so-called glass ceiling. And we've made some other important gains in the United States. For example, the Supreme Court went from 0 female members ever to 1 female member in 1981. And then it took another 12 years to get a second female justice. That was Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who joined the court in 1993. And then it took another 16 years to get another woman on the court. But between 2009 and just last October, we got 3 more elected. So we're doing all right on that front, generally speaking. Also, women ran for and elected to U.S. congressional seats in record numbers last year, 2020. Currently, we have 141 women that hold seats. So that's 23 senators and 117 House representatives. And while this is exciting, it means only 4% of the 535 members of Congress are women. And they account for less than 1% of all elected officials in the U.S. Now, when you consider that women outnumber men in the United States by almost 1%, we need to do better. But of course, as you know, this is not just the U.S. problem. According to the UN, women serve as heads of state or government in over 22 countries, and 119 countries have never had a woman leader. At the current rate, we won't reach gender equality in the highest positions of power for another 130 years. So what can we do about that? Not all females are going to go into politics, but we have the power to ensure women have equal and active participation in all areas of civic life and government. There's a group in the US, a nonpartisan group called sheshouldrun.org. That group says that when women actually run for office, they're elected at the same rate as men. The problem is they don't run as often. The organization actually has a link on their website that I think is really cool. You can use it to send an email to encourage any woman that you know to run for office. Someone along the way encouraged one young woman to do just that. At the age of 29, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez earned the distinction of being the youngest woman ever to be elected to Congress in 2018 on her very first try. And I'm very proud to say that here in Jakarta, both the U.S. mission to Indonesia and the U.S. mission to ASEAN are led by women. There, Heather Variaba and Sharjah Melissa Brown. So thank you again for being here tonight. Thank you for listening. I'd like to thank our moderator, Nadira, and thank you to Ms. Markham and Ms. Margaret for being our panelists tonight. And I know you're eager to hear from them, so I will stop here. Terima kasih atas kesempatan untuk berdiskusi isu-isu penting dengan ibu-ibu dan bapak-bapak. I wish you an enlightening and inspiring evening. Terima kasih.
Thank you so much, Ibu Linda Hines, for the opening remarks. And now, without further ado, please welcome our moderator for today, Mbak Nadira Titalia, staff at the Indonesian Central Bank.
Thank you, Maya, for that introduction. So, hi everyone, good evening. My name is Nadira Titalia. I'm an analyst at International Department at Bank Indonesia. Welcome to tonight's session of Knowledge at America. On tonight's session, we are very much look forward to gain new insights from our two distinguished speakers who will talk about women in politics. So our first speaker will be Susan Markham. She's the partner and co-founder at Strategist. She is also an advocate for gender equality and female empowerment, speaking often about the essential role of women in politics and development. Susan will share with us a glimpse of women participation in US politics, including the current dynamics, outlooks after the latest election. So without further ado, Suzanne, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to those around the world. I'm going to share my screen now. Oops. I don't know how many times I can do Zoom and get worse at it every time. Oops, sorry. Sorry. It's taking longer than I thought every time. Okay, there we go. So once again, thank you for that. I'm going to talk a little bit about women's political participation in 2020 and where we are now. As Linda reviewed a little bit, in the 2020 elections, it was a historic election for us, with Kamala Harris as the first woman, Black person, first South Asian person, and first woman to be vice president. So in addition to her, a record number of women ran for the US Congress, and a record number of women are now serving in Congress and state legislatures in 2021. A record number of women of color also ran for the US Congress, and are now serving in Congress and state legislatures. Democratic women continue to significantly outnumber Republicans, at least 2-1. So it's not split fully between the parties. But this past election did reflect a huge number of Republican women coming in. After 2018, there were a huge number of Democratic women who were coming in. But even after all of this, we have to remain humble in the US because we still rank 67th in the world for women's political participation, with just 26.4% of the seats in the House and 24% in the Senate. So one thing that was different about 2020 for women candidates was that for a long time, and I've worked with women candidates in the US for over 20 years, is that we often wanted women to kind of act more like men when they were running for office, because the visual of a candidate was a white man. But in 2020, women candidates really embraced being a woman. They didn't try to hide that they were moms. There were commercials of women breastfeeding their children. They really ran as women and didn't hide from that. And women of color ran as women of color and being involved in the Black Lives Movement, Black Lives Matter movement, and other things. They found other ways to communicate that they were tough. So you didn't necessarily have to, stand, out in the middle of a cornfield or with a gun or be a sheriff to be tough. You could be tough because of personal battles. You could talk about how you yourself, we had women who were veterans who had served in the military, but we also had women who had overcome personal challenges that they highlighted in their campaign. Also, we had such a variety of women running, people who were African American and Native American and Asian American and disabled people, and not that women also were monolithic, and they shared that there were conservative women and very liberal women running at the same time. And so it really was a watershed that we had enough candidates that we could show that women vary very much across the United States. So looking at women voters in 2020, as Linda also referenced, in the United States outnumber men, but they also vote more than men do. And so, but we have seen this gender gap play out over various elections since about the 1980s. In 2020, among married men and women, there wasn't a consistent voter gap. So if you were married, men and women turned out in about the same numbers. But if you weren't married, women voted at much higher rates than men. So there's some theories about this, but they still are trying to figure out why that happened, because we're trying to close gender gaps. But looking at age, younger women tended to vote at higher rates than their male counterparts. But then it's the opposite as you get into the older voters, where older men over 65 years old turned out at higher rates. There was a significant racial and gender gap at the presidential level. A majority of white women voted for Trump in 2020, but a majority of Black, Latina, Asian American women backed the Biden ticket. So now we have all these great women in office. We have the vice president, as we've referenced before. We also have the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, who was Speaker of the House before, lost it, and now that the Democrats have the House back, is now Speaker of the House again. So she's the highest ranking woman. And then we also have a very diverse cabinet, the most diverse cabinet we've ever had in the executive branch. Out of the permanent secretaries of the 15 executive departments, we have 55% who are non-white and approximately 45% female. And it's still not set yet because there are other cabinet seats, but these are the 15 permanent ones. And several firsts: the first woman director of national intelligence, Avril Haines; the first woman to lead the Treasury, Janet Yellen; the first Black chair of the Council of Economic Advisors is a woman; the first Native American to be the Interior Secretary is a woman. And that is the Native American in charge of the interior is a huge move because for so long, our Native Americans had not been treated well by the federal government. And now the fact that this former Congresswoman is there and leading our work with Native tribes is just amazing. And then we also have the first Asian American woman to serve as the US Trade Representative, Catherine Tai, and she has been the only one so far to be unanimously voted by the Senate. So she was a very strong pick and liked by people from all parties. So it's important to have representation, but it's also important because women's presence in the government, in the Congress really makes a difference. Women's meaningful participation in politics affects the range of issues considered and the solutions proposed. So in the most recent bill to fight COVID here in the US, it wasn't just all about medicine and vaccines and masks. It also talked a lot about care issues, child care issues. Women have disproportionately had the burden of caring for their children and their parents during this time. So there was support for childcare and other care issues. There was support for people who have been unemployed, and in the United States, it's been disproportionately impacting women losing their jobs or having to lose their jobs due to care issues. So the range of issues when you talk about the response to COVID has really been expanded to make sure that it's more than just the health issues, but more broadly as well. We've also seen research that countries often experience higher standards of living, better outcomes and access to education, infrastructure, and health. So we will see how this plays out over the coming years as women play a larger role in Congress. Women tend to work in a less hierarchical, more participatory, and more collaborative way than their male colleagues. This is an overview, and not every woman does this, but it will be interesting. Our Senate is split 50-50 between Democrats and Republicans right now. And so it will be interesting to see if the women members of the Senate work together to kind of break the logjam and move some issues forward that need to be moved forward. And also there are reports that women lawmakers are perceived as more honest and responsive to their constituents than the male member. And this will be interesting because right now, I wouldn't say there's a crisis of democracy, but people are questioning whether their governments can work for them in a good way. And so if citizens believe that their government is more honest and responsive to them, then I think it's a virtual cycle for people then participating more in their government. And then that way their government will work better for them. So far, we've already seen great movement because of women's presence and the president's commitment to women's issues. In the first days of his office, he repealed the global gag rule, which is changing the way the US government funds healthcare around the world. In the House of Representatives, they removed the deadline to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. We've been working on it for years, but there was a deadline, but now that's been removed. The Violence Against Women Act, which expired a few years ago, that has been reauthorized. And there's also been an interesting single parent caucus. Oftentimes people assume that the people coming into Congress are men who are married, who can take care of the kids. And after the election, Nancy Pelosi called all the members to Washington within just a few days. And a few of the women members who are single parents said, my kids are in school. I can't just fly there. Like, what am I going to do for childcare and all these things? And so now there is a group of women who are forming a single parent caucus so that Congress, the processes of Congress are more friendly to parents. And so it really makes a difference when people who represent our everyday lives are in DC, in Washington, representing us in these bodies. But there are still challenges that remain. Linda talked about She Should Run, which is a great organization. And it's true, when women run for office, they win just as much as men do. The problem is that we have incumbency. There are no term limits for members of the House or Senate. And right now, 98% of all incumbents are reelected. AOC, which Linda said, she was a rarity in that she knocked out another Republican in a primary to win her seat. But when 75% of the people are men and 98% of all incumbents are reelected, it's just going to take a really long time for women to either challenge incumbents or fill those open seats as they become available. There's also in the US a huge problem with the amount of money it takes to run for office. You know, we have the House and the Senate. In the House, it takes an average of $2 million to run, and in the Senate, it takes $15 million, which is crazy. It's such a huge amount of money that people who are in office spend a lot of time focused on this issue rather than representing us in Congress. And so that is also a challenge. But there are huge opportunities. The power of role models, seeing Vice President Harris on the news every day. She's making policies, she's meeting with world leaders, she's directing the military, she's on the border, all the work that she's doing. You know, girls see that every day, and they see her in all the roles playing as vice president, as well as these other women who've been elected. And that really makes this generational change that, yes, I can do this too, as they see diverse women in these leadership roles. And then the administration has made some significant movements already. On International Women's Day on March 8th, President Biden announced that there will be a White House Gender Policy Council. So there is a council in the White House who reports directly to him, thinking about gender issues and the way that we are implement gender across all of the US government. And 30 different agencies have to give him a report every 6 months on how they're doing to support women and girls in the country and around the world. One outstanding issue is we have had, we advocates outside the government have been pushing President Biden to have a feminist foreign policy. There are several countries around the world, including Sweden, France, Canada, and Mexico, who are working towards this. And so we have been pushing the Biden administration to do the same. We will see, it's still early, but hopefully within the first year, people at least consider changing the way we work as a government through the USAID, through State Department, through the EMS and other foreign assistance programs on the way that we can move gender equality and women's empowerment forward. So that is all I have. I look forward to a robust conversation and many great questions.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne, for a very insightful presentation. Now, we would like we would have the discussion session after the second presentation. However, if you already eager to ask or question, you have tingling questions regarding the topic, please feel free to leave them your questions in the chat box. Please also mention and I will read them out later. Now I would like to open the floor to our second speaker, Ms. Anna Margaret. She is a lecturer in the Department of Political Science, Universitas Indonesia. She is also a researcher at Cakra Wikara, which is focusing on socio-political studies that aims to collectively produce knowledge with gender-based perspective in order to enhance the quality of public policy and empower people participation. Mbak Anna will share with us the current views on the current trend of women and politics, especially in Indonesia. So without further ado, Mbak Anna, the floor is yours.
Terima kasih, Nadira.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen now. Right. Is the audio working all right? Because I'm hearing feedback. Is it okay?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
All right. All right, so I'll just start. Hang on a second. I'm with you on this, Susan. Never get any better. Right, okay. So I am asked to talk about three main themes. The first is about Indonesian general point of views on female political leaders, and then looking at opportunities and challenges of our effort in increasing numbers of women in the parliament. And then the last is to be touching on the article that I co-authored about the relationship between identity and support for leadership, in particular with a study case in Indonesia. So I'll just start. I believe if we want to talk about general point of views on female political leaders, we can look at the data trend, and there is an increasing trend in data about number of candidates and elected female in local government, so elected as local government leaders, and then in local legislature and also national legislature. However, this happened also in the backdrop of gender bias is still dominating in leadership assessment. So people can actually find this easily identifying how report news, both in print and electronic media, talking about how women candidates physical appearances more than their professional track record, for example. So starting from the nomination process, the campaign, and then their service or tenure. And another thing that I would like to highlight here, how you can easily find in so many media at present, even among women activists, pinpointing the phenomenon of familial ties being an explanation to the increasing number of female political leaders. Now, I would like to argue that this is another part of the gender bias on leadership assessment, because familial ties is not exclusively plaguing female political actors, because this also happened with the male political actors, which will require a different discussion altogether. But how the assessment of increasing numbers of women politicians are somewhat attached to free meal tickets or easy access due to what we understand as affirmative policy in Indonesia. As we know, in Indonesia, with affirmative action, we only have it in political parties, central board, and also in the parliament. Only in these two formal institutions that Indonesia has introduced affirmative actions. And even the implementation still calls for a long critical comments and needing for revision, because, for example, for the parliament, in the law of the election law, we can actually see how the affirmative policy is being issued as a recommendation, as a suggestion. So the quota that is introduced as being suggested to political parties. It is only after the commission, the electoral commission or the KPU introduced a technical guidelines, then the affirmative 30% candidates are being mandated, are being obliged to political parties. And this is a critical point to raise, because on a higher level of regulation, which is not actually find a more clear regulation that actually stipulates sanctions once the regulation is not fulfilled. Only at the technical regulation we can find that the KPU will return the list of candidates party and ask them to rectify it so that it meets the 30% quota for candidates. And however, we also understand that this means the affirmative policy valids for candidacy, but not for the result. With the political parties, we can find the affirmative action in the political party law. It states that 30% of women are a prerequisite for women for a political party to pass qualifications by the KPU to enter an election. However, as we can easily find in the KPU website, some of these political parties either had not updated the list of candidates, the list of the women as the member of the party structure, which means that the KPU would have to rectify this. So imagine if the regulation is not there, how this would be. And I would actually say, even with the regulation, I mean, we know that regulations alone will not guarantee results. If I may add, any regulation or laws that actually can be well implemented, only the ones that serve the social needs held by most people. And this is the portrayed so far. Now, going to looking at the data here. These are a cross-sectional data on candidacy votes and seats. And this is what I meant by increasing trend. It is consistently increasing within the last 3 election cycles, 2009 up to 2019. Both the candidacy, the votes, and the seats obtained by female politicians. And with our direct elections still implemented, this means increasing legitimacy because more and more people showing higher support for female politicians. So I'll just continue. If any of you would like numbers better than graphs, maybe. Some of us do, I know. These are the numbers. And we know in 2009, Democrat is the party that won the election, and PDIP won the last 2 elections. And we see how the seats of women here, oh, I forgot to put it here. This is the percentage of women seats by parties across election cycles. The trend is also increasing, even though some of them were decreasing, but the main trend is increasing. Now, that is the picture in the legislature. I would like to talk briefly also what happened with the local elections. People who ran for positions as local government leaders, and this is the trend. I only took the last 4 local elections because they were the simultaneous local elections held in Indonesia. And a similar increasing trend of female candidates and elected female government leaders here are shown in the graphs. So what would be the challenges and opportunities of increasing the numbers of women in parliament? I try to look at this by mapping into 2 categories, the procedural or electoral politics and the non-procedural. In the procedural bit, I identify 3 components. The first one being the recruitment and nomination mechanism related to affirmative policies remains loose. I mentioned this earlier, how the formulation of the affirmative policies somewhat very flexible. We can then argue, of course, the effectiveness of quota system. And we had seen countries who do adopt a quota in their either constitution or the party internal regulations or in the election law. But the way we have it now, we actually had seen increasing trend of female politicians elected into the parliament, but it's still needing substantive revisions. At the moment, the percentage 30% is stated there in the election law as, I mentioned it as in Indonesian, it's himbauan. So it's okay if it is being fulfilled, but if it is not, then that's fine too. So I think although we can argue whether or not we want a quota or whether or not Indonesia is ready for a quota, because this also calls for readiness of each political parties having women potentials to be nominated. We can call for an enforcement of the law by talking about stipulating placement of 30% of women, not in any sequence of the list, but on the top list. Because also our research at CWI is showing the importance, the remaining importance of the list, on the number within the list. So those who are placed on the top list have greater opportunities to win. Now, apart from the placement on the list, also there is a placement in districts. Political parties nowadays have access to easily identify which districts are their potential. I mean, even down to kabupaten level or this, kabupaten level. So there is a question when a party had nominated 30% of women, have they nominated women to win, or have they nominated women to meet the administrative prerequisites so that they can enter election? I'm just going to continue with the system now, with the election system. For the last three election system, for the last three election cycle, we have implemented open list proportional system, and the data that we collected from the KPU showing improvement on numbers of votes given to women candidates. And on this particular aspect, I would have to raise many women political members and members of parliaments, those potential women that we've been working with, have actually been calling either them or their parties wanting to go back to a closed list proportional system. At this time, the DPR, our National Representative Council, had decided that it would not continue discussing the plan to revise the election law, which is, there is a plus and minus in that, but so far we can see that an open list proportional system will remain, and we remain to see whether or not women also, and the party, not just the women, but also political parties, put and manage to get more confidence in them to contest in an election with an open list proportional system. And the last one is about parliamentary threshold. I'm not going into details what it is, but we know that practically this is the percentage that will define whether or not a party gets seats in the national parliament or in the local parliaments. And the percentage at the moment, taking from the 2019 election, is 4%. And we had seen potential political parties with high number of female candidates could not enter the DPR, could not enter the national parliament because they could not meet the percentage of the parliamentary threshold. And also prior to the DPR decision not to continue discussing the revision of the election law, there was actually opinions of some political parties to increase the percentage of the parliamentary threshold. And I'm just suggesting here that despite understanding and hearing many women, potential women from across political parties saying that they agree to increase the parliamentary threshold, data shows that actually a lower parliamentary threshold leads to more female being elected into parliaments, because a lower PT, a parliamentary threshold, also means larger room for political parties to compete. Again, I understand we will then be hearing arguments about having a more efficient election, having fewer political parties, meaning having more stable or more effective decision making. But when we talk about democracy, I think it is also good to say that democracy never actually promised the most effective and efficient decision making, because it does ask us to be responsive to the various groups, especially the marginalized groups that otherwise will be unheard. And then I'll go to the non-procedural aspect of this. It seems that maybe this has been the way since 2014, and then I think it has been increasing up to today, that we are seeing a sense of anti-politics sentiment and growing mistrust and skepticism among the civil society groups towards political parties and towards election. I don't know if I can call this a regression of democracy, because I would like to think that when we talk about democracy, it is not only about the civil society. Obviously, it is very much about the political parties and the politicians and the parliaments and the way they perform their work, the way they represent the people's interests, and so on and so forth. But this growing anti-politics sentiment, I think, is something that needing to be mentioned as a challenge. And I'm not going to pretend like I know the remedy to this. If anything, maybe a continuous monitoring of the civil society groups of the Member of Parliament's work on current bills. For example, we are looking at the anti-sexual violence bill being discussed. It was taken out from the priority list in 2020. Some of us must be very familiar to it. The commission assigned to discuss the bill, saying that the bill was just too complicated, and then it was just simply taken out from the priority list. Now it is back on the priority list in the 2021 priority list, and it is needing our collective effort to monitor whether or not the DPR will pursue working in the interest of ours to pass the bill into law. Second of all is financial independence, and this is where I think the gender perspective also needs to be raised. Financial independence is especially hard for women, and dare I say, this even happened to women across social classes, because it is about autonomy, making decisions in one's household, whether or not she being the daughter or the wife or the mother. And our predominantly patriarchal values are still very much putting women into playing complementary role in a household. So it is different when men to make decisions whether or not they want to enter politics. But for women to enter politics, they really would have to discuss it with their children, husbands, parents. And I think it is also interesting to mention here, in many of our research, when we look at representation of women in political parties, in the parliament, in the bureaucracy, they all say some of the, if not all of the potential women who make it to the top positions say that they made it there because of the support from the family. And in our 2013 research, I remember when asked what are their most significant barriers serving as, this is for the member of the parliaments, and I must say this is the local parliaments, and they say the barrier comes mostly from the political parties, and this is where we call our research back then as the paradox of representation, because political parties as the most significant and important means for women and men to enter the parliament have in fact been treating or impacting differently for men and women as politicians. The issues that they want to bring onto the table, the perspectives that they want to take on, at so many times are actually different from what the parties have in mind. So the parties' general policies would often contradict with the women's perspectives or priorities. And many of the women politicians testify that they either have to find a different way to compromise or even sometimes give up, because they also have to show commitment and obedience to the parties, which is understandable because we know parties work hierarchically, and one's position within the party structure also affects so much how one can make a decision, access a decision-making processes, and so on and so forth. To which I'll bring my last point of presentation. Our recent study on identity and leadership, this is a study that was conducted late 2018, early 2019. It's a survey looking at about 2,000 respondents in 5 provinces. And the questions being asked is basically, are these, what do people want from their leaders? And what matters more to voters, a leader's identity or the effectiveness of their performance? We're looking at this through an experimental research. So these are the key findings. The identity of a leader seems to be playing a stronger factor, influencing people's willingness to support the leaders. And we know leader is only relevant when there are supporters behind them. May it be formal legitimacy or non-formal ones, but a leader can be only called effective when they can make their followers agree or do what they wish them to do. Second findings showing that leaders who reflect the identity and characteristic of a group, in which the term now starting to sound a bit technical, prototypical leader, seems to be considered more trustable, trustworthy, and supported. And the survey show, so from the 2,000 respondents show that the prototypical leader in Indonesia is male, in their late 40s, Muslim, Javanese, religious. And I have to say that this is not only about one's religion, as we understand, but also being pious. So piety matters. And then also being respectful of tradition, which we know, or maybe I would claim, that this shows people relative reluctance towards radical changes and transformation. And the survey also showed that personal traits such as honesty, fairness, valued most, and even taken into account more importantly compared to the leader's ability to perform. And this bit here is actually used in the questionnaire. The leaders ability to inspire, the leaders' confidence, the leaders' forgiveness or forgiving traits, and their ability to get things done are actually scored lower. So there is the overall emotional sentiment, if you like, or the psychological mood of the 2,000 respondents, of course. And then this is where we suggest that the identity of prototypical leaders give them what we call a license to fail. Again, allow me to say this in Indonesian. It is not only izin untuk gagal, but it's actually, it is okay not to perform as long as we think that you represent our identity. As long as we think that you are like us, it's okay if you are not actually doing your job well, which is a point to be concerned about, that we need to work with, because it seems that prototypical leaders can even retain support when they are already evaluated as being ineffective by their followers, by their supporters. In consequence to that, non-prototypical leaders, leaders who are thought as not actually representing the dominant values or the dominant identities, find it harder to get support even when they are perceived to be effective. And if we looked at what the prototypical leaders are, let me just continue with some takeaway points. So how do we understand the increasing trend of female political leaders being elected, receiving legitimacy? I mean, we had seen Ibu Megawati being the first vice president in Indonesia. And I don't need to remind us that she was not actually elected in an election. She was then stepping up after President Wahid, the former President Wahid, was impeached. And then the responses from Islamist parties and also from many other, even some of her ministers then were somewhat unsupportive or less supportive. However, having Ibu Megawati as a vice president in Indonesia give us a collective memory that we could actually get there. It is important to send a message of having the opportunity for female, for women, for girls to actually break the barriers, those what we call or understand as a glass ceilings barrier. So on the right hand, I am showing female minister in Jokowi's presidency. This number actually decreased. We had 8 before. So now we have 5. But I think it is also enough to say that we've heard so many good reports about them. Although there are still critical comments as well regarding some of the regulations and laws, but I would like to take this opportunity to highlight Ibu Bintang, for example, on the corner right. She is our Minister of Women's Empowerment, and I must say personally, I convey my admiration because I think she has demonstrated an amazing way of being reached and communicative and then receptive of so many women's civil society groups, and also being very responsive to women's issues, even though she doesn't really have the background of being involved in any grassroots women movements or women organizations. And then on the left, I am showing only a number of female MPs in the national parliament across political parties. I'm just going to, of course, we see Ibu Puan Maharani in the middle, and she is the first female being elected as the speaker at our national parliament. So it is also symbolically important because this shows that women can attain that really strategic leadership position. And then we could see here Matia Hafid on the right. She was a journalist, and then she is now even part of the. She is, I believe, the head of the commission on tackling communication in the DPR and so on and so forth. But there are three last points I would like to reiterate here, that the increasing trend of legitimacy for female political leaders in Indonesia still facing challenges, but it is showing a positive trend. Secondly, that leadership position is always a product of a systematic structural process. Simply because a woman is elected as an MP, it doesn't mean that she can then be expected to do wonder on her own. She has to work with her fellow MPs and then member of the party who also maybe serve in the commission or outside the parliament, and she will still have to answer to the chief of the party and so on and so forth. So it is the challenge and opportunities for success should be seen as dependent on so many various aspects. And then third or lastly, increasing the numbers of female, might it be through quota or others, is still relevant, but can no longer be pursued in separation from transformational leadership. Because in principle, when we want to talk about affirmative action, we are talking about our wish to push for leadership that could actually transform politics into better, into better welfare for more people, more equality. And I will end my presentation there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Ana, for a very clear and presentation. So before we move to the discussion session, I'd like to highlight some of the points from both presentation. Susan shared about the current dynamics in the US politics and how is the current outlook of US political views, especially after having the first female president, while Mbak Ana mentioned and shared with us about the outlook and trends in Indonesian women in politics, along with the challenges and the opportunity, while both agreed that women's meaningful participation in politics will affect the range of issues considered and the types of solution provided by the government, and both agreed that there is still huge opportunity for women participation, especially in politics. So before we move to the question from the audience, I have questions myself, so I'll take the opportunity to ask first. So maybe to Susan first, like how does the fact that in the US there are two-party system that is so ingrained in the United States politics, does it have any impact on how women are represented?
Yes, we've had two parties for a long time, and every once in a while a third party, the Green Party or others, try to come in, but we haven't been able to break that, even though the two parties have changed over our 200 years, and different coalitions come together to form those parties. So they haven't remained unchanged. They've just remained that there's only two of them. It is different because we also have an open primary system. We don't have candidate lists, as Anna was describing, because it's an open primary. The parties are not as strong and they don't control the candidates that run. So that is interesting. They're much weaker in the US. We also don't have quotas, as described by Anna. We have, as I said, open primaries. The only quota that exists is that the Democratic Party has a quota for our national convention. And in that, 50% of the people who come to the convention have to be women and 50% men. And that has had an impact not on candidates, but on the issues that the Democratic Party addresses, which is much more broad than the Republican Party. So having two parties, in a way, does not allow for more women's participation because they don't have anywhere else to go. They have to work within the two parties. On the other hand, what we found is that the parties are open to the idea that having more women run actually helps their party. We collect a lot of data here in the US, and one trend from 2020 is that usually in a presidential year, the president being on the ballot helps those that are running for Congress and helps those that are running for state legislature. So because Joe Biden was a Democrat, Democrats would be helped, and we call that the tailcoat effect. But in 2020, it actually happened the opposite way, that the local candidates who were more diverse than ever, women, people of color, younger people, they actually helped President Biden get more votes than he might have otherwise gotten. So the two-party system, just the fact that there's only two parties, doesn't have a direct gendered impact, but it does give us less options of parties that we can go to when we want to run for office.
All right. So in Indonesia, I think it's more for Mbak Anna. This is the question from Linda. So she's interested in knowing your opinion on women leadership in positions of security agencies like TNI, Polri, or maybe in the US like CIA and related security agencies. It seems that there are fewer women in those positions as opposed to like parliament, ministries, or just regular workplace.
Thanks, Nadira and Linda for the question. Unfortunately, let me first do a disclaimer. I have not looked into the data intensively. I don't have it at the moment, but from what I read so far, yes, the number is even much less, significantly lower than we see at the parliament. I maybe have not mentioned that in the parliament we had seen the highest out of the election, the 2019 election results, which is 20.5%. And in contrast to that, in some of the, I'll say the security institutions, number of women are even lower, can be explained by an even stronger patriarchal culture in the recruitment and career promotions. At CWI, we are actually at the moment doing a research on ministerial bureaucracy, so across 34 ministries. And in fact, in the defense ministries, the percentage of women, not only at the overall composition, but also sitting in the higher echelon, is quite good. It's actually quite good compared to the other ministries. However, when we look at the media, for example, very few women actually made it into the news. And we never had seen a woman appointed as Minister of Defense, for example. Yeah, so I guess the culture of recruitment and career promotion influence a lot how a formal institution then show women's representation.
Okay, maybe Susan, do you have more stories about women participation, especially in securities agency in the US?
I actually don't know and haven't been able to find the level of employees within the security field in the US, but over the past two administrations, President Trump and President Biden have both elevated women to be head of security agencies. So the National Security Agency, as well as the CIA, we've had our first woman leader there. I do think both the military and the security, because they are more formal hierarchies, that because women have just been able to serve in the past couple of decades, it is taking women time to work up the leadership ladder. But even on International Women's Day, the president promoted 2 women to 4-star generals in the military. And so as we have the opportunities to serve in battle and to have the experience, women are moving up in pretty good numbers. It's nowhere close to equal, but we are making progress, and actually the progress has been quicker there over a short amount of time, as opposed to politics where it's been inching up just a little bit every year.
So maybe perhaps you could, Susan, you could more our audience, Yudi Iswara, would like to know more about the different stances that you highlighted between Republican and Democrat. Is electing female Republican lawmakers is actually a hindrance to the champion feminist agenda in the US politics, or it is actually enhancing the discourse of gender rights, since maybe implying the Republican congresswomen are advocating a form of so-called like female experience from the other side of progressive spectrum.
Thank you for that. I do think there is a clear difference between women who represent the Democratic Party and women who represent the Republican Party. Now, within each of those, there are very diverse groups, right? Within the Democrats, there are conservative and more liberal Democrats. But generally, women who are members of the Democratic Party believe in gender equality and women's empowerment. They tend to believe in the Equal Rights Amendment. They want us to sign on to CEDAW, the international law for women's rights, which the US is one of 3 or 5 countries that have not signed on. So generally, Democrats believe in sexual and reproductive freedom, LGBT or lesbian and gay rights as equality issues. Generally, within the Democratic Party, that is true. On the Republican side, they tend to be more conservative. They base their women's values around more traditional roles for women in the home, strong family rights, and this sort of thing. They tend to be not as open about women's sexual and reproductive freedom. So there are clear differences between women in both parties, but there's also differences between women in the parties themselves as well.
Oh, so all right. So they're both like have the characteristic of women in both party are similar to the characteristic of the party itself. So I think I have a question for Anna. So how do you see the regulation of the quota of women participation in politics, in parliament, and do you see it is needed, and how should women make the most of it?
Right. Now, this is the $1 million question for me, because again, even I am having mixed feelings about whether or not Indonesia needs to adopt a quota in terms of reserved seats, because we do adopt quota in the candidacy. So for the last 2 election cycles, we have seen KPU mandating all political parties to put 30% of women in the fixed list, in the final list. However, what happened is in 2014, for example, we saw the placement of this 30% women varied a lot, and very few of them actually placed on the top of the list, which then translated into the number of women being elected, because data shows that voters still looked into placement. So and voters have different treatments. for male politicians, for male candidates, even though they are placed in the lower, at the lower list, they could still get high votes. This is due to their network being well known, or other social support that the male have. In contrast to that, with the female candidates, only those who are placed within the, I remember it didn't go anywhere lower than 7th for women. So none of the female candidates placed lower than 7th actually had enough votes to win a seat. So to answer Nadira's question, how do I feel about the quota is needed, not necessarily in a form of reserved seats, but what is more important, I think, is what Suzanne had shared with us, the experience in the US. It's internal party commitment to gender equality that really counts, because otherwise these laws, party law, election law, will be something that the political parties feel that they are being imposed on. They will do basically a minimum fulfillment of the requirement, in which I said earlier as an administrative checklist. That's what they did. How can we verify this? We can verify the placement and whether or not the women potentials are being nominated in potential or winnable districts. And once they were elected, whether or not they were actually assigned on strategic leadership positions within the parliament. Because as we know, and I mentioned this repeatedly, it is this, when we talk about women's representation in the parliament, we really have to think of it as a hierarchical institution in which decision making power is not given to anyone who simply becomes MPs. It's whether or not they have that position, that access to make a difference, to access the budget, to access meetings where important decisions being made. The same thing also reflect on political parties. We have the 30% policy in political parties, and the law actually stating 30% of women have to be in the central board party structure. And again, fulfillment of this requirement is open to questions, whether or not it is an administrative thing, or whether or not a party really commit to having more women representing women's interests, priorities, and agenda. And how do we verify this? Look at the party internal bylaws. Do they actually have a strategy on how to promote women's issues, women's agenda? Do they actually allocate significant percentage of the budget for women, for potential women of their members? Do they allocate budget to help women financially when women run for elections? So I think internal party commitments is key, more important even than a quota that is being taken whether or not in a law or a constitution. Thanks, Nadira.
Thank you, Mana. So for Susan, how is it in the US? Like, do you see it is needed for US to have quota for women? Because like many countries already have.
Yes, a majority of countries around the world have a quota system. And as someone who does a lot of work with women around the world running for office, I think a quota system is excellent. It actually has really increased the number of women in public office around the world dramatically over the past 20 years. Unfortunately, it would not work in the US because of our political system. Because we have open primaries and first past the post, it would be very difficult to impose quotas. Also, you know, we have that kind of Wild West, pull yourself up by your bootstraps sort of aura around the US. And so people are generally not in favor of quotas in the US political system. I should say there are a few small localities that have quotas within their local councils. But also, as a general rule, I don't think they are the future of democracy here in the US, although we found that they are very effective around the world in the right political system.
Oh, all right. So for both speakers, I think I see that most common challenge for women, maybe not only in politics, but in like many common workplace, is that maybe most of the time she feels like she needs to work harder to demonstrate to employers or to the superior that she's qualified for the job, especially when women has like how do you say it? Like she has maternity leave and she has to be stepping away from her desk once in a while to mengasihi, how to say this. So how do you see it? Maybe Mbak Ana, how do you think we should? It is the best way to overcome such maybe like discrimination issues for women?
Thanks, Nadira. Yes, that is the reality that we see a lot, yeah, in Indonesia. Maybe the word you were looking for is pity, that women were seen as being a creature that needs pity. Even affirmative action was seen, or even by some groups still is being seen in Indonesia as a free meal tickets, when it is not. Even though in the candidates list, women were asked to be filling the 30%, however, they still have to contest with men on a supposedly level playing field. And to answer your question, discrimination, or I would say values, daily values and norms that we live at home, is a starting point, if not a pivotal starting point, when we want to think about pushing for more equality and fairness. Because what happens in the public, I believe, is an ultimate translation of what happens in the domestic, how men and women's division of labor, acceptance in the social system, when, for example, when domestic responsibilities such as caring and caring for the homes, for the children, for the elderly, are still being put exclusively on women's shoulder, then we are seeing huge significant barrier that I don't see a quota of any kind can actually address, because this is about everyday values that can be addressed actually through education, and it will take a very long time, but we have to start somewhere. And I think what we see now, we often hear, right, Nadira, every time we enter election stage, might it be local election or national elections, we had seen women are not fit as leaders. Women are not fit as leaders according to religion. And these would be things that somewhat cannot be touched by quota or any similar policy to that. This can only be touched by education, by transforming values from home, how young women, girls and boys are taught to be sharing equal responsibilities starting from home, equal responsibilities starting from schools, equalities starting from being heads of schools, principals, because at the moment we are doing this study on seeing women's representation as the head of education or heads of schools. But Indonesia, I think, is facing this challenge, but going towards a hopeful direction. We had seen the rise of promising female leaders. Yes, we have also seen questionable female leaders, but I think the path towards equality and more pressing demands for equality in Indonesia is there. And I would say 10 years ago, I could never imagine seeing so many accounts on social media calling themselves as feminists, Indonesian feminists, Jakarta feminist, feminist this, feminist that. So I think it is a promising trend. These are the young women that are seeing and potentially challenging and moving towards that transformational leadership that I'm talking about. So not simply about correcting the numbers, but also correcting the so-called fairness that we are seeing at the moment, needing so much work.
Nadira, can I comment?
Sure. Yeah.
Because I don't want to create the image that the US is fixed and that we have gender equality and women's empowerment here. So much of what Anna is saying rings so true for what's going on here in the United States. You know, we had 6 women run for president this year and about the same as number men. But still in the media, you saw a bias about what she was wearing and about his positions on policies, or why a man was qualified and a woman with more experience was not seen as qualified. But the thing is, we got to see it in real time. And we got to question our own assumptions and how the media portrayed it. We got to ask voters, why would you say this, 30-year-old man who's never had experience is more qualified than a woman who is a US senator? Why, so we got to question our own opinions about these things. So it's clearly not fixed. Women who are running for office or seeking jobs have to prove they're qualified. And they often have to be more qualified than the men who are going against them. So that still exists here. It's just that because of this election cycle, it wasn't just one woman running, right? Hillary Clinton represented every woman in the United States. But this year we had 6 women who were white and Black and young and old and from Hawaii and from Minnesota. And so we could judge women as themselves, not as representing every woman. And so I think we've just moved ahead more quickly or better than we would have without being able to see these issues come up in real time in politics.
Oh, okay. So, Susan, our audience still would like to know more about what happened in the US politics. So the next question is from Divio Adi, who would like to ask a question about the case of Hillary Clinton's popular vote win back in 2016. And then on that note, does the electoral college system somehow influence women pathway in the US politics, or just like it's a coincidence?
So that was coincidence. The electoral system is a super old relic of the way our country was set up, and there is now a strong movement to do away with it. But basically, the popular vote determines how your state votes. So we have 50 states, and I'm not voting for Joe Biden. I'm voting for how my electoral vote is going to happen in my state. And so what's happened is as population has shifted across the US, the electoral college doesn't represent the population. I mean, you can also see the US Senate, every state has 2 senators, but in some states, something like 54% of the population is only represented by 26 senators, because huge states like California and New York have the same number of senators as Wyoming and Rhode Island. So the Electoral College reflects this state as a population as opposed to the popular vote. So while Hillary Clinton won more popular votes than Donald Trump, she did not win that Electoral College. It's not a specifically gendered issue. It's a problem for, quite frankly, all Democrats who are running. And so the question is whether we would change this before the next election or not. Obviously, obviously it's not even a partisan issue. It's just turning into a partisan issue because of the way the Electoral College impacts the presidential race. I should say, I do think there were gender issues in Hillary Clinton's race 4 years ago. But she was also unique in the fact that she'd been in public life for so long and she was so well defined that it was very hard for her to change people's views about her when they went to vote for her. The second issue was that she was running as part of the system. She was running as the most qualified person to ever seek office. She'd been a first lady, a senator, the Secretary of State. Unfortunately, the people in the US did not want someone who was political. They were willing to roll the dice and risk someone who said they were going to burn the whole city down and not do politics as usual. So no matter what she would have done, she could have never run as an outsider. And Donald Trump could have never run as an insider. So the dynamic 4 years ago were very much against her bio. And so there were a lot of other issues like that. And I think what we've done is swung back now to one of the most qualified people to ever win the presidency because of his long term in DC. But I think 4 years ago, Joe Biden couldn't have won because it was so much the US population was against this idea of a professional politician or someone who had been in the system.
Okay, so I think I have a question for Mbak Anna. You mentioned like leadership, having women in leadership position, in the top position is like more structural process. So, but we did have a strong female leaders, Ibu Sri Mulyani, Ibu Susi Pujiastuti, some of the vice ministers are also women. So, what do you see their biggest attributes that push them to the top position and Indonesian politics?
Right. Can I just start with the names that you just mentioned are all in the executive branches, the executive branch, right? The ministries. But I also would like to mention some others in the parliament who make a distinct contribution in representing women's interest. When I said that this is a structural process, what I am suggesting is for us to understand that when these women make it, this actually applies also to men, but this is how I would like to highlight the values, the system treats men and women differently, even though they are being formulated similarly and said to be gender neutral, and stated to be merit system. The merit system itself is gender biased, and as we had talked about how division of labor between men and women at home will also be influencing how much women would bring themselves to run for election, to run for career promotion, and then to have a decision on their financial backup independently. And when I also talk about the structure, when we evaluate a woman's or a leader's success or failure, we need to see the attribute. First of all, when they are being let me first of all map it this way. With the executive branch, this will be women political leaders who are appointed, right? With the parliaments and the local governments, these are women who are elected. The election and the appointment happen in the backdrops of predominantly strong patriarchal values. So the values, the system, the structure already favor the men. So when they manage to be appointed or elected, they have already won over the predominant system. But then once they sit in their positions, they have to work, they have to serve during their tenure, again, against the backdrop of that predominantly strong patriarchal culture. So with women being ministers, for example, I would argue that there is bigger opportunity for them to perform because they then become the head of the bureaucracy. In contrast to that, the head of the government, local governments, for example, and even the national government when Ibu Megawati was president, they have to work with a larger system of bureaucracy. And her legitimacy as leader is being often contested, not only because of their identity as women, but also because of their way of doing politics differently, because they are bringing different perspective and experience into the table. Sometimes they win, sometimes they manage to compromise, sometimes they have to give up. I would like to raise our attention to most recent reports, well, here, Iceland, Germany, Taiwan, Norway, New Zealand, Denmark, mentioned to be 6 countries who are doing so well in recovering from COVID because of their female leaders. I would argue, why are media so reluctant to look at the women's percentage in the parliament? These 6 countries, not all of them have quota, but all of them have at least 10 or more women in the parliament, which means the system works in favorable to women, forming a critical mass and being able to be heard, being able to put their agenda on the table. Because otherwise, if it's, say now we have 20%, we are happy that it is the highest, but we are concerned because if we look at the number of women being appointed as head of commissions for example, Nadira, it's actually lower than what we had in 2014. Komisi 8, Commission 8, for example, this is a commission within the National Parliament that is exclusively assigned to tackle the issues of women empowerment and children protection. And none of women is actually sitting as the leadership positions. It's all men. So the bill of anti-sexual violence was discussed in that commission in 2019. And look what happened. It was taken out from the priority list with the argument that it is too difficult and it is irrelevant in the time of pandemic. How can they be saying that when the data is showing there is a significant increase of data of domestic violence, especially in the time of the pandemic, because women then are confined to their houses and houses are not equally safe to everyone. And yet priorities. But also talking about structural is that my concern about growing tendency, even among my colleagues, I have to admit, many of them, or this is also a self-note for me, tend to look at women as if once she is elected as local leaders, as MPs, as member of parliament, the national or the local, she has to perform. And this is somewhat a trap of essentialism, as if women's agenda is exclusively on the shoulder of women. It is not. Having them into the parliament, meaning that there is an opening opportunity for women to participate, but having them to be able accessing decision-making processes is another level of battle, I would say. And political parties are responsible for it, for opening up the avenues, for making it possible for women to sit in the strategic positions where they can actually make changes, where they are actually being heard and taken seriously.
So it's a very, very strong point for Mbak Ana to conclude our very, very insightful discussion for tonight. So Mbak Ana, do you still have like last statement which to conclude all of your sharing session for tonight.
Okay, last statement. I would say that Indonesia should not lose hope for enforcing affirmative policies. The question whether or not we need a quota is besides the point, but a fight for more substantive representation of women's agenda and priorities is what really matters. But I also believe that pushing for a better, higher number of women representation is relevant, because we cannot be blaming women per se when we see that the substantive representation is not yet there. It is part of what the collective efforts that is required to get it there. So I also would like to say that Indonesia is still having so much homework, but I think we are on the right path. We are seeing a growing number of women activists publicly coming forward, calling themselves feminists, and understanding also that there is a resistance to this. There is also a growing fundamentalism or fundamentalist ideas that says Indonesia doesn't need feminists also. I think it only even acknowledges the importance of the movement in Indonesia. Feminist agenda is being taken seriously. That's why the resistance comes in. So yeah, I hope that leaves us with hope and a positive outlook ahead, Nadira.
Okay, Susan, do you have any more last statement you want to give us?
I would say that the people of the United States should also have hope. We also, I think, for many years, were under the idea that the women in the United States had equal rights and we were doing fine. And I think a lot of things that happened between 2016 and 2020 really opened the eyes of a lot of women in the United States that our rights were not as secure as we thought they were. And so we had more women run for office than ever before in 2018 and 2020, and more women win. And so hopefully that is a positive cycle. She should run, and other organizations are saying that more women are running again in 2022. So as long as we see that progression, I think that we're going in the right direction. And so I would say let's be hopeful as well, and hopefully we don't have to wait for Linda's prediction of some 20 years down the road before we get gender equality. Hopefully we will move quickly, move forward more quickly now. So that's my hope.
All right. So we can all agree that promoting this, increasing female political leadership, should be aimed in harmony from all of us. But we do have high hopes. So, all right, I think it concludes our discussion on tonight's session, Knowledge at America. I would like to thank both speakers, Susan and Mbak Ana, who we had a very insightful discussion with. I also would like to thank all the audience who had joined us virtually this evening and participating in very fruitful discussion. So we are very much look forward to have you all again in the next session of Knowledge at America. Now I'm going to give the floor back to Maya.
So much, Mbak Nadira, Ibu Susan, and also Ibu Ana. That was a very empowering session. We hope to see you again next time. Now, the rest of you, please don't go anywhere, because I have the name of the winner for our social media quiz today. Earlier in this event, I asked you guys, is it true or false that Megawati Soekarnoputri is the 4th president of the Republic of Indonesia? And the right answer is false. Megawati Soekarnoputri is the 5th president of the Republic of Indonesia, and she is Indonesia's first female president. And our lucky winner for today is at Sheila Nizam from Instagram. Congratulations! Now, you may be wondering, how can I develop an awesome idea for a place like this? Easy. You can go to our website at www.atamerica.or.id, click create an event, and collaborate with us. All proposals coming to us will be reviewed, and your event might be featured here soon. And while you're on our website, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletters for weekly event updates sent straight to your inbox. Alright everybody, I think that wraps up this episode. It has been really fun, but unfortunately we have to say goodbye for now. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter at ATAmerica for event updates, fun content, and so much more. Also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Thank you so much everybody for tuning in. Good evening.
And we're good.